So welcome everyone at the Innovation Café. My name is Margot. I am the host of the Innovation Café. For the people that have not heard of the Innovation Café before, we are a networking event here in Eindhoven. So usually when there's no pandemic going on, we are a networking event on location at Kazerne, where we have drinks, but also always an in-depth note is being presented as well in the form of presentations or workshops, discussions, whatever, on innovation in tech or design, or knowledge in a more broader sense of the word. Now during the pandemic, we're doing this online, and Chris Archibald has been so nice to share a little bit about his knowledge on antibiotics. A bit of a gloomy subject, I think, but yeah, very interesting to hear about it and to get more awareness of this. I now want to give everyone a chance to ask their questions if they have them. So if someone wants to start with questions, feel free to post them, to unmute yourself and to ask them. Otherwise, I also have some questions for Chris. But yeah, Chris, thank you for joining and a very interesting presentation.
You're welcome.
Is there anyone who wants to start with questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, go for it.
So hi, Chris. Thank you for the presentation. So I think it's super interesting because I'm actually working as an engineer at Medtronic, just in front of the Maastricht University, so you may know. And I think it's interesting to see this presentation as I would say, I work in developing medical devices like pacemakers. So I think the topic is also, I mean, you were speaking about orthopedic devices, but I think for us, the topic is also relevant. How to prevent the infections around the pocket of the pacemaker, for instance. And I know Medtronic is looking more and more into antibacterial and anti-infections cover. So it's really interesting to see how important is it also for us to take this into as a challenge into our developments. And I had a question because you mentioned that, okay, so antibiotics lead to I would say to make the bacteria more resistant to this. But if there is, I would say, a risk that bacteria become also resistant to to specific surface over time as well.
Estelle, thank you for your question. That's indeed a very good question, and also one that is explored nowadays in various areas. They can also become, let's say, resistant to certain surfaces, but it's not like the antibiotics, it will not kill them, but they can just attach. And for us as a patient, if they can attach to a surface and they are not dying, that is still a problem.
Mm.
So yes, this is for sure an issue. And we have also seen biofilm formations on, let's say, the walls of operating rooms and on door handles. And yeah, this is still happening. So
for the long-term strategies would be like doing research into different type of structure to make sure that there is always, I would say, I expect that if it's new, the bacteria is not used to it. So how to handle this from a strategic point of view? Because at the end, then we may expect that the bacteria will always get used to a new structure, basically.
Yes, well, one of the things I can tell you that is being explored at the Delft Technical University is we make small spikes, and these are only 4 microns high on the implant surface from a metal point of view. And then the bacteria has to do an overhang over this spike. And we know there are certain degrees that they can span, but if it goes above 45 degrees, they can no longer attach.
Okay.
If a bacteria cannot attach to the surface, they cannot form this biofilm, and the host immune system of your body will in the end eradicate them. It might take a couple of months sometimes, but if they are not in this biofilm, they will be killed. So our focus are mainly on making sure they cannot attach to the surface of the implant, but also this goes also for the effect of soft tissues.
Mm-hmm.
They are even in let's say breast prosthesis surgeries. They have found biofilms on the implant, but also besides the implant. So yeah, sterilizing tissues with that with new, let's say, coatings or surface technologies is very important.
Yeah.
Also a major part of our research endeavors in this field.
Okay. Super interesting. Thank you, Chris.
Welcome.
We have a question from in the chat. You proposed some ideas, and as I understood, you aim for post-surgery part of the issue. I am wondering how generalizable or applicable those proposed approaches can be applied to more general cases. One example can be people having cold-like illnesses rooting from bacteria.
Yes, good question again. Of course, I talked about mainly about the curative part, but of course, prevention is even more important in this field. And what we're seeing now with this antimicrobial resistant is something we have not seen in the last 50 years in the Netherlands. People are going to die out of pneumonia because the bacteria are resistant to the antibiotics we are giving them. And over time they will weaken and the body will succumb to the pneumonia. And this has not happened in the Netherlands since the 60s, actually. So we are going back in an area of medicine where we really don't want to go back to, but yes. And especially in the case of the lung, it's really hard to get medicine locally there at high enough quantities that are not toxic to prevent this phenomenon. And I think one of the things that we could do is use current standard antibiotics, but infuse them with another antibiotic technology, and then make them more potent. So prevention in this case is, of course, also really important. I'm not sure if this answers your questions fully, but if not, let me know in the chat and I can go in more detail.
Well, oh, I think that's a yes. I also have some questions for you as well. I was wondering if you can say a little bit on how overpopulation plays a role in this problem.
Yes, that's a good point. And we see, of course, with a lot of influx of people that we take on as a hospital country like the Netherlands. This is we are living closer together in small distance. And even skin contact or breathing contact can transfer bacteria in your surrounding area. Because of COVID, we know a lot more about this in the last couple of years. Last year, actually, there's been a lot of research on the transfer. And these bacteria can easily survive 72 hours on a blank surface, even in the sun, direct sunlight or UV light. Some of them will die, but others will not. So yes, the more contact we have and the more closer we live, it can really facilitate this spread of AMR.
I find it also interesting because in your you had a slide with where AMR is most current, and the Netherlands was one part of it. But I think it's actually really interesting because I mean there's so much like connections nowadays that I mean you would expect these borders to be less strict in that way.
Yes, and also that means that our personal hygiene, which is the first preventative step, is important. And these are, of course, very small behavioral changes. I mean, I think nobody in the Netherlands has washed his hands more than in the last year. And we know it works. I mean, if you look at the influenza virus and its effect it has this year in the Netherlands, it's almost negligible. Because of personal hygiene, it was not transferred. Almost nobody died because of influenza in this year. And of course, people will say because they all died of COVID. I don't think that's true. It's also because of personal hygiene. So that is also important.
Dagmar, you had a question.
Yeah, so I was wondering, you are talking about biofilm formation on implants, but
Yes.
Is it also possible for biofilms to form on, let's say, non-implant surfaces, other places inside the body?
Yes, they can. I mean, it's the natural state for bacteria to come together, protect them, like I showed on the glaciers and on the hot springs in the Yellowstone Park. These are all biofilms. If you see the green films on the water supplies in the farmlands, these are essentially all biofilms. but then they can easily be broken. But if they are on the implant, it takes about 10-15 minutes and they are already attached with van der Waals forces. And in about 24 hours, it's irreversibly attached, and you need sonication for a number of times at high frequencies to get them off. So they are really good in attaching to any kind of surface.
But I mean, like, would it occur that a bacterial infection inside the body were to form such an environment without having a surface to attach to,
Yeah,
like an implant?
Also, let's say in the osteomyelitis example I showed, I'm not sure if that really counts. It's more like a conglomeration of hotspots of bacteria together. It's a little bit different in the build-up than an actual biofilm on an implant surface, but the effect is actually the same. So I think the microbiologists will disagree and do not call this a biofilm, but for a practical point of view and a pragmatic point of view, the effect is the same. So that's why I call this, of course, debridement, but it's just cutting away dead tissue. And as long as they are in this dead tissue, you cannot sterilize this with antibiotics. They will persist forever. You have to take everything away. There's also a little amount of healthy tissue to make sure that you capture everything.
Yeah, so the immune system isn't able to clear this material that they're building as well.
If they are free-floating, they will take care of things. It might take some time, depending on your own health status, but they will take care. But if they are protected by this biofilm, they are hardly to be reached. And the problem is, what we see, especially in orthopedics, even after 8, 9, 10 years, people get a dental surgery, the host immune response goes down, and then they come out for the secondary burst. And then you have an acute problem that can even lead to sepsis. So they in somehow they feel when your resistance goes down, and then they come out and wreak havoc in your body.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Another question in the chat. One of the expected outcome of the project is models. I was wondering about the scope of these models, especially related to this, who is going to support you in this project from the perspective of computational science?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we actually want to do is, I mean, there are a lot of international standards on quality, regulatory affairs, and all this stuff. But you have the Japanese industry standards, you have the USA ASTM standards, you have European standards. And what we would like to have at the end of this 6-year project is have a line of models, so a workflow from very early on, molecular, in vitro, in vivo, preclinical. And that our technologies, but also other new technologies can go to this model, and that we can really severely limit the time to market. Usually nowadays it takes about 10 years. But if we can bring that back to 7, and everybody goes to the same workflow, and we can easily compare the effects of the new technologies, I think that would be really worthwhile, not only for us, but also for others working in this field. So we are going to need a lot of regulatory affairs that also come from the companies, but also from the Ministry of Health, for instance, in the Netherlands, and from the RIVM. They are one of the key players in this field. And what we also want to do is look at the adverse outcome pathways. So every step of the testing, we also are still determining what can go wrong. How do we remediate this? And is this remediation actually working? So it's an integral part of our design process. And I think that's also new. It's used in some industries, but not too much. And the other thing is, of course, I didn't talk about this, but the microbiome. So basically your resistance is being determined in your body, in your intestines. There's a lot of new interesting work that is coming out of every country in worldwide actually now to know about this more. And we have omitted this in our project. And it was an objective choice. But we also see the need for this, and to include also the food industry, because medical use of antibiotics only 9%. The food industry is about 90%. So my aim is, and of course this can sound a little bit arrogant, as soon as this project is running nicely and smoothly in about 2 years, I'm going to apply for a Zwaartekracht grant in the same field, but then also adding in this microbiome research and adding in the food and health industry. So we really go to this One Health approach. So we also have to take into account what's happening in food for animals, for instance. And that is not in the current project, but something we need to add.
It's nice.
And then I saw there was also another chat question from Ruben on the importance of the biofilm.
Oh, sorry, let me just read it out loud for the people that are re-watching this. You argue the importance of biofilm prevention eradication very well. Does this mean that the importance of bloodborne infections is I can't pronounce it, I'm sorry.
No, I understand. And bloodborne infections are usually because of these are the secondary bursts out of a biofilm. So at that point, the host immune system is overwhelmed by the bacteria, and patients usually go into sepsis. And at that time, the role of us in orthopedics is very limited. The first goal is to keep the patient alive. And addressing the biofilm at that time is not the most important part. We first have to make sure we keep them alive, and then we are going to address the local problems. So bloodborne infections, they are really tough, and in about 40% of them, people still die. So we have a very limited window of treatment options, and they are mostly focused on keeping the patient alive and not on looking what's going on his pacemaker or on his hip implant. At that time, that is not the most important issue.
I hope that answers your question. I think so. You mentioned in the question before this, you mentioned two things. One is the government and two is bioindustry, which I find, well, not per se bioindustry, but I'm assuming that's what you mean with it as well.
Yes.
And I'm curious because I mean, obviously this is a problem that involves way more than just healthcare, you know, like it's a problem that involves multiple chains of, and I'm just amazed because I was looking a little bit before when I watched your talk, and the World Health Organization already commented on these issues in 2017. I mean, it's 4 years ago, and probably even before that. I mean, there have already been these things. How come this is not yet like a global how are we not well aware about this yet?
Well, I think globally we are aware of this, but some countries just lack the funding to do something about it. I mean, the World Health Organization has warned us for this about in the last 2 decades. So people know it's coming. And the problem is in the Netherlands, we are still relatively safe. I mean, we have about 10, maybe 10 staph aureus outbreaks in the country every year. So that's nothing. And what we do is we send everybody home, we clean it very nicely, and then it's business as usual. Whereas I work in the hospital in Maastricht, every patient that comes in from France goes in isolation because we have to assume that he has MRSA with him. So per country differences are really high. We have regulated the antibiotics already for a long time. That was a really good choice. Our food is really clean and our water is clean. So we have a little bit of a false sense of security that this is not going to happen with us. But we already see that the effect of immigration last decade is influencing us, and we see new bacteria in the clinics now that we have not seen in the last 30, 40 years, and they're coming back. And the old antibiotics can counter them, but the new ones do not. So you also have to go back to the old antibiotics that we actually are not using so much because we see problems again that we have not faced in the last decade. So yeah, it's very dynamic, I have to say.
Yeah, it's super tricky. Considering the whole idea of, I mean, you're mentioning in the Netherlands is relatively well arranged, and I mean, I can imagine I mean, it's not necessarily per se that in European or like countries like the US or anywhere where I don't like to say this word, but more developed. It's it's not per se that it's better. Can you compare a little bit where it, for example, comes to countries where the healthcare system is barely there for, say, for example, in more third world countries?
Yes, I for sure can, because we send a surgical team in orthopedics to Ghana every year. We have a collaboration there, and we also trained a surgeon there, an orthopedic surgeon, and his care area is 6 million people. And we have, I think, 1,500 orthopedic surgeons in the Netherlands. So they care for only about 80,000 people. So that's already a big change. And what we have seen is like this bioactive glass that I showed in my presentation. It works really well in Ghana because it's a one-way approach. You clean the bone, you put it in, and you send the people home because they will not stay in hospital. Most people cannot afford to buy the antibiotics they need, or they only take them for 1 or 2 days, then go to, let's say, a witch doctor and rub themselves in with a chicken leg. I mean, the education in this field is already lacking in the Netherlands. And you can imagine that in other countries with less health information structures, it's even a lot worse. People don't know about it because they have not heard about it, because the government actually don't want them to know, because yeah, it can lead to panicking situations if this was.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah. So there's a couple more questions. Also, if there's more questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, we're gonna go to the last few ones. Oh, there you go. For people that are looking at this, there's more information via the link NWA-Dartbac.nl. I'll put it below. And you also mentioned in your talk that it's possible for bacteria to take on the genetic markers of other ones.
Yes.
How does that work? Because I mean,
Yeah,
do they? I mean, I don't know if it's possible to go into depth in this, but they changed their own genetic code basically to.
No, they can. It's I try to give you a simple answer, and this is not maybe fulfilling for everybody, but they can share RNA or extra DNA outside their body or cell, and that can be taken up by other bacteria, and this way they can share genetic depositions. So they actually can share this immunity genetics to surrounding bacteria. And that also makes it very tricky, because if you have only one of these resistant bacteria, and you can, let's say, with the genetic marker map it and kill it specifically, and I'm not saying that we can at this moment, but it is something we are thinking about, that would be very interesting. But we never know how much of this genetic they already shared in the population. And over time, this can grow, and they can also take on genetic from different strains. And then they become these superbugs, and they are almost resistant to everything.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, for me, that's a good enough explanation as far as my knowledge goes on these topics. Another question in the chat. Regarding the goals within the project, regarding the communication with groups developing new materials without a specific goal of AMR, and to what extent would the new coatings, etc., be able to be implemented in new complex implants which have the goal of regeneration?
Yes, of course, we can make use of already developed technology. We would be remiss not to do this. So we are for sure looking everywhere what other people are doing, and what we can copy on that. But then we have to, I mean, I work in orthopedics, and the main topic we want our implants to do is also integrate. They have to have a strong connection to the bone. But now this coating, if you only make an also integrative coating, that's not going to work. So we have to have a trade-off between antimicrobial properties in the coating and osseointegration. And the question always is, how much antimicrobial can you put in without sacrificing the osseointegration? And that's a trade-off, and it depends on the mechanical and the biological environment around these implants. So yeah, that's of course a problem. But we for sure are looking outside our own consortium for other smart ideas to implement. And we also have the opportunity to bring other groups into the consortium if they have a good solution, because the aim of this project is also to make a nationwide platform to tackle this. So these first 6 years are the start, but it is my sincere hope that after that the RIVM or the Ministry of Health will take this up and make this a continuous subsidized topic in the Netherlands. And if they do that, I'm happy to run it for them. That's not a problem. But this goes far beyond the scope of only this project. But we have to start acting now, because developing an antibiotic will take 20 years. It's already too late almost. And other things need to be developed.
Thank you for the answer. But I think what I was aiming for with the communication with groups developing new materials without AMR, I was more thinking of groups that were not taking it into account yet at this moment, and to what extent you would want to, or it would be a priority to communicate with them and really express the importance of the issue, and maybe also with that then bring them into the consortium to say like, oh, we have developed this.
Yeah, I mean, clearly communicating what we're doing and why we're doing this nationwide is of very large importance. So not only giving information about the AMR awareness, but also what are we already doing to tackle and where are our lacks in knowledge. Because in the Netherlands, the materials field and application field is really strong. And I'm sure there are a lot of pockets of excellence outside our consortium that we can use. And if we can find them or they come to us, we will do that, of course. But we have to make them aware that only developing a coating, I mean, if you do it in parallel, you can also make a coating that's antimicrobial. From a design point of view, that is not a big extra step. You can do that in parallel tracks.
Thank you.
Dagmar, you also still had a question.
I was wondering about, you mentioned the development of new antibiotics taking such a long time. So how would you approach like managing with the current antibiotics that are still effective? What strategies would keep them effective as long as possible?
Yeah, combination therapy is one thing. So you combine different antibiotics in the same patient, because usually you also have multiple bacteria strained in the same patient. So that makes sense. Also combining them with proven antimicrobial compounds like copper or silver ions is an idea. But also I think we have hardly explored the mechanical attack on bacteria, and this induction heating or this bioactive glass are new ways of thinking to create a local environment where they cannot survive. And without actually killing them, we just make the environment unhospitable for them. And I think this is has started in the last 8 to 10 years. So there's still a lot to be learned. I also like supramolecular chemistry. If you combine chemistry and coatings in the same platform, you can make it multidirectional. So that's, of course, also interesting. So there are a lot of things that we can do actually in this field.
Right, thank you.
I just want to point out, if there's more questions, then please put them in the chat now or raise your hand now. Otherwise, I'm going to give it a minute to see if there's someone else who wants to ask a question.
And I think also my email address is on my first slide. So if you have questions or remarks later on, I'm always happy to receive them. Just drop me an email. That's never a problem.
And everyone can follow the progress on the project via the link that you just shared, right? In the chat. Great. Then I think there's no more questions from our audience, so I have a last one. So what can people at home do to create awareness or to stay away from this problem as long as possible?
Well, if you use antibiotics, question if you should use them, also to your general practitioner. And if you use them, make sure that you use them properly and you complete the course, of course. These are no-brainers. Personal hygiene is really helping in getting the bacterial problem down. And and we need to talk about this. I mean, it has been on the back burner for too long, and now it's really the time to bring it out in the open. Maybe scare people a little bit, like I did with this video. I mean, 7 mutation, 11 days, and they can survive in an environment 1,000 times the antibiotic that you normally would kill them. I mean, if that doesn't scare you, then nothing else will probably. So yeah, it's hard. It's time to make them aware of the scope of this problem, and that we are really in an island in the Netherlands and in the Scandinavian countries, but that the situation is already a lot worse in other European countries, and that we need to prepare for this. So that would be my my answer to that.
Okay, we will try to do that. And I hope this this talk was at least a very tiny first step in that. If there's no other questions, then I really want to thank you, Chris, for the talk and answering all the questions. And also everyone that's joining. I see already a couple of people had to leave, but everyone that's still here, thank you. And everyone that's rewatching, also thank you for rewatching. If you want to stay up to date, you can go to the link here that I am going to put into the video afterwards. And if you want to see more of the Innovation Cafe, we have a website as well, which I will also put on there. And next week we have a talk by Ine Gevers on a completely different topic, which is on AI and a new exhibition that's coming up here in the Netherlands, Fake Me Heart. So if you want to join us then, feel free to. And you can find more of that on our website. For now, I want to wish everyone a nice evening and hope to see you again.
Okay.